6.21% of Class C leaders of the companies that took our survey were Hispanic. And of that group, 3% were Latina. I see some people shaking their heads. I'm tempted to. But I would say that there's just work to be done. HACER sees that opportunity. We need to work together on this continually, and that's what these conversations are about. So we're going to be listening to, I have the honor of speaking with today, a very passionate and very experienced C-suite leader. Our guest today has spent his executive years at MetLife and Freddie Mac. In his role as general counsel for both companies, he promoted diversity within legal departments and among his outside firms through talent stewardship initiatives that aim to help young and diverse lawyers rise in the ranks. He currently serves on the board of directors of Latino Justice PearlDeaf, and he's the co-founder of the Alumni Society, an organization of Latinos who graduated from prestigious universities. Please join me in giving a warm HACER welcome to Ricardo Anzaldua. Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning.
Thank you. We're so glad you could be here. So we're going to be talking, as I said, about the C-suite. And the objective is to give you some perspective on how to rise and how to succeed. Really the things that nobody else is going to tell you, right?
Right.
We're going to talk about topics like essential qualities of leadership, relationships, politics. I won't give it away. But before, I really want to give us some context of who this gentleman is. I had the opportunity of talking to him yesterday, and I have to tell you, I wish I just had more time. I hope you're all jealous right now, because this is a really key position. Could you tell us about your journey? What is your career journey, and how did you get to that C-suite?
Sure. Well, I went to undergrad at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. After Brown, I had a graduate school experience in California at UC San Diego in a PhD program in history, and I became a publisher there of academic works about Mexico and U.S.-Mexican relations. I decided that the academic life wasn't for me, and I decided to go to law school after I had been working there for about 5 years. I went to Harvard, graduated from Harvard in 1990, and from Harvard I went to one of the New York Wall Street law firms, Cleary Gottlieb, and I was with Cleary Gottlieb for 17 years. First 17 years of my legal career were first as an associate and then as a partner in that law firm. I did lots and lots of international work, lots of work relating to Latin America, including Mexico and Brazil and Venezuela and Colombia. And I decided really about 17 years in or so that maybe there was something more to life than collecting closing binders and deal toys. And so I thought, maybe if I were to do something else on the outside of the law firm, not only could it be more rewarding for me than just sort of being on a treadmill and having either my clients angry at me because I was charging them too much money, or my partners angry at me because I wasn't collecting enough money. And so I decided, you know what, maybe I'll go to an in-house position, and from there I might be able to have a more rewarding career, but really more importantly, a career where I could have a much bigger impact on the world. A law firm lawyer is basically a hired gun. You do whatever the client tells you to do, you finish up the task, you go away, and hopefully the client's happy enough that they'll hire you again. When you're in-house, when you're actually working inside of a corporation, you have the ability to affect the life and the fabric and the organism of the corporation. You affect the people who work in the corporation, and you get a platform to speak to the world. And this stage is one of those platforms that you get as a result of having a corporate role. So I left the firm. I went to the Hartford Insurance Group in Hartford, Connecticut, as a person reporting to a member of the C-suite. I was hired as a direct report to the general counsel at the Hartford. I was the head of their M&A and securities practice, and I had a great career there. The Great Recession exploded in my second year that I was at the Hartford, and I ended up having some tremendous experiences, and those experiences built into the resume that ended up having MetLife come and tap me on the shoulder in 2012 to become General Counsel at MetLife. I was at MetLife for 5 years and had a great run at MetLife, highlighted by a lawsuit that we filed against the Obama administration to reverse the designation of MetLife as a too-big-to-fail company. We were the only company to protest against being designated as too big to fail. We filed that lawsuit. We won that lawsuit. So we, MetLife, were the only company that was ever designated as a too big to fail company and then had the courts reverse it. After that was done, I really wanted to find another important and interesting thing to do. So I applied to be the general counsel at Freddie Mac, where there was reportedly an initiative underway to return Freddie Mac to private ownership. As many of you know, during the Great Recession, the government took over Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and about 10 years into that process, the management was looking to reprivatize the companies, to do a re-IPO of those companies and return them to private ownership. And as I've told some of you at the happy hour last evening, that turned out to be a ruse on the part of the Trump administration. They had no intention of returning Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae to private ownership, even though it's part of the convenient talk track. But in fact, the Trump administration appointed an administrator who really just didn't want the government to be involved in the housing market at all. And at the same time as they were pretending to get the companies ready for reprivatization, what they in fact were doing was crippling the abilities of the company to function at all. And of course, it's very difficult to get private investors interested in investing in a crippled company. So once I peeled the veil away from my eyes and I saw that this was a ruse, I decided to retire. So I've been retired for about a year, and I'm really very excited to see what the next challenge might be, see if I can find another dragon to slay.
Well, we are glad you're here, and what a journey. I mean, I hear things, I'm hearing not only the business acumen and experience, I'm hearing about politics, I'm hearing stories about, figuring out this ruse, right, that you described. How are you managing that at a leadership level? I mean, rich content experiences to draw from today, so I'm grateful for that. But in all of that, in all of those moments, was there one where that kind of cued you, oh, I'm headed toward the C-suite. This is going to be me. Did you have a moment like that? And could
actually, I did have that moment. I described to you that I was at the Hartford when the Great Recession exploded, when the market shock happened in the fall of 2008 with the failure of Lehman Brothers. And the Hartford, just like many other insurance companies, was highly sensitive to movements in the stock markets because they had so much of their balance sheet invested in equities and debt of companies, on the stock market. So the actual structure of the liability is complicated, but the way that it happened was they had sort of prospective liabilities. They were the way that the liabilities were structured. There were going to come a day, 5 years down the road, 7 years down the road, 10 years down the road, when there wasn't going to be enough money to pay the claims of the policyholders. That's the way that the contracts worked. So in order to reassure the policyholders in the market, the companies needed to accumulate a lot of capital in the present just to reassure that in the future there would be enough money there to pay all the claims. So the company decided, I was consulted. I was part of the team. I was the head of M&A. I was consulted about what to do, and I suggested that we go out and find somebody to make an investment in the company, make a major stake in the company available for sale to an investor. So The C-suite went along, the CEO and the CFO and others, and we hired bankers, and they went out, and really very quickly, within about a week or 10 days, they came back with a proposal to do an M&A transaction to sell 20% of the company to Allianz, the German insurance company. And everybody was very excited. Okay, well, we've got a deal. And the CFO said, wait a minute, we need to get money now. In 3 weeks, we have to issue earnings. And if we don't have a deal on the books in 3 weeks, we have to tell the market that we're insolvent, that we're going to fail, we're going to go into bankruptcy. We can't get that deal done in 3 weeks. And I said, why not? And the CEO turned to me and said, do you think you can get this deal done in 3 weeks? I told the CEO, I think I can get it done in a week. And so he said, all right, go ahead, it's your deal, go run it. So that was Friday afternoon. I hired my former law firm to do the work. I hired the bankers who had found this investor on Friday afternoon. And on Monday morning before the market opened, we announced the deal. Over the weekend, we had been able to persuade the buyer that it was in everybody's interest to do this as quickly as possible. On that day in early October of 2008, every single number, every single name on the big board at the New York Stock Exchange was red, except one. The Hartford was green. Because we had announced this huge deal. We got $3.5 billion from Allianz to buy this stake. So, as everybody recalls, the market kept on plummeting, right? It didn't matter. Everything just still kept going down, 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 and the S&P declined by more than 50% in that month. So even before the champagne was done, my boss came to me and said, we're going to need more capital. What can we do? And I said, well, the Congress just passed this law for the Troubled Asset Relief Program, where the government will give funds to depository institutions to help them sustain the market crash that just took place. So we can apply to Congress to get that funding. And my boss said, yeah, but you forgot something. We're not a depository institution. I said, the application isn't due for a month. In a month, we can be a depository institution. So I bought a bank, basically, is what I did. I bought a troubled bank from the FDIC. It was in Florida. We had a month to figure out what we were going to buy. We found a few troubled banks that we could buy. Some of them were very small. We could have bought them for like $1 million. But I thought, you know what? At the end of the day, the government doesn't have to give us this money. They have to decide whether they want to give it to us or not. So I found a bank that was big enough that if the government didn't give us the money, it was going to be painful for them because they were going to have to pay a bunch of depositors. So they had a choice. They were either going to give the Hartford $3.4 billion in TARP funding, or else they were going to have to pay $600 million to depositors who were going to lose their deposits in this bank. And the way the program worked, in order to receive the TARP financing, you had to prove to the government that you were going to be good for it. You were going to be able to repay it. And so it worked out. I structured the deal so that we only bought the bank if and when the government gave us the TARP funding. My boss called that the Anzaldua clause. So the government had a Hobson's choice. Either they give us this money or they pay out to the depositors. And it worked. It worked fine. And we, in fact, did repay the TARP funding within a year. We had the TARP funding for less than a year. And we were the only company that got TARP funding that didn't have to have a shareholder vote on compensation because we repaid it so fast that there was no shareholders meeting between the time we got the money and the time we repaid it. And it was right after that deal closed to acquire the bank that the general counsel came to me and said, I'm designating you within the C-suite and at the board as my successor. So that's when I knew. That finally, the answer to your question. That's when I knew I was on the path to becoming C-suite. So the epilogue to the story is that my boss had the bad judgment not to retire and let me become General Counsel, and before he retired, MetLife came along and tapped me on the shoulder and asked me to go become General Counsel at MetLife.
Let that be a lesson to anybody who's planning to pick their successor. Don't wait, okay? Well, you sound like you were also the right person at the right time for that company, right?
Yeah, it was lucky.
Wonderful. So you get to the C-suite, but you didn't do it at Hartford. You did it at MetLife, where you joined as General Counsel. Could you tell us, what were your first impressions? Was it what you expected, or what didn't you expect?
It was sort of what I expected. At the Hartford was a real education for me. I was coming from a law firm. I didn't really understand the ins and outs of a corporation. I really didn't understand how decisions were made. And I really learned a lot about how successful executives in corporations are extraordinary, energetic, creative, and innovative, right? They kind of push the envelope and they do great things, but they do it always with a very, very careful eye to not stepping on anybody's toes, right? So this is really politics. Corporate executive positions are hyper-political. So you always need to make sure that all the constituencies who are involved in anything that you're working on have been talked to, have been taken into account. And especially the senior executives in those constituencies need to talk to the senior executives in your constituency. So I had to make sure I was talking to all the right people, making sure that they knew what was going on. I remember, when I went to MetLife, there was one incident where a news story had broken about some of MetLife's operations in Europe. And the CEO came to me and said, "Did you know what was going on here?" There was a legal aspect to the scandal that broke in Europe. And I said, "Well, I really only found out about it a couple of hours ago and I'm trying to figure out exactly what it means." He said, "I don't ever want a story to come out in the paper and to learn about the issue from the paper. I want to know from my executives what's going to happen before it happens." So I took my admonition. The same thing happened in Asia probably 3 weeks later, and I called up the CEO on the phone and I told him, "There's a story that's going to break tomorrow in the Japanese press about X, Y, and Z." And that afternoon, I got a call from my peer, who was the head of the Asia business, and said, "I can't run this business if you're going to be telling the CEO stories, before I have a chance to tell him myself." And so I learned, okay, I need to build a process so that I advise my peers of something that's going to break before I tattle on them to daddy, right? Dad's going to find out about that. So I had to have a process where I would give him a call, even if it was 3 a.m. I said, "Dad's going to find out about this, so you better give him a call." And that's how, that's kind of the thing that you need to learn in order to be, successful in the C-suite. Just a couple of examples.
Yeah, so here, you talk about that key relationship with your CEO. You were active listening, right? And you were responding to him, but also had to consider your relationship with your fellow C-suite member, in this case, the person in Japan. Right? What about some of the personal dynamics within those relationships, the aspirations, the ambitions, and professional careers? How did that impact the relationship building or the sensitivities around that once you're on the C-suite with your teams?
So, there's dynamics in the C-suite, and becoming attuned to them and aware of them is really a key to your success as a C-suite executive. You need to understand who are the members of the C-suite who want to become CEO. And you need to figure out what are they doing to try to position themselves. You don't want to get into the path of somebody who's ambitious and, it may regard you as a threat to their ambition. So, being a colleague, being a supportive colleague is very, very important. Even if you do have aspirations to be CEO, even if you are a threat to them, you need to appear not to be a threat to them. So you have to be very, very careful about how you manage everything. And you need to be able to perform your role. I often say that there are two key elements to being a successful member of senior management in the corporation. The first one is consummate competence. And so, I go back to what Ann Chow said yesterday in her talk, the 3 Ps, right? Performance, positioning, and perception, right? So you have to look to everybody like the absolute best person to be doing the job that you're doing. And a lot of that is just making sure that you bring all of the expertise that's necessary to address all the issues into play. And the second aspect, besides this consummate competence, is absolute trustworthiness. So nobody succeeds in the C-suite if other people in the C-suite think they're not trustworthy. So you need to really build a relationship with the CEO that's totally built on trust. The CEO needs to trust you implicitly. And your peers on the C-suite need to trust you implicitly. Everybody needs to regard you as a team player who wants everybody to succeed. And so, that's really the key to being successful in this arena, and it's not easy to do. For those of you who are seeking to be members of the C-suite, I would say, be careful what you wish for, because this is not easy stuff. Being the head of the organization you work in the C-suite is not simply doing the same job you're doing right now with more pay. No, it's a completely different job, and managing all these relationships is a huge part of the job. I'll talk a little bit more about managing your own organization, which is also a huge part of the job. But, it's all of this interplay of the politics within the C-suite. Being a trusted team player is the key element, and being a consummate professional in the area that you represent is the other key element.
Thank you. Well, we know that there's another entity that's also really important, another set of relationships that a C-suite member has to manage. Let's talk about that board of directors and how that relationship looks. How would you describe the relationship from your experience?
So, really the best way to describe this is to really understand the function of the board and understand it in a very nuanced, deep, and detailed way. The board of directors is not part of the management of the company. The board of directors is an oversight body. It oversees the company. It tries to spot risks. It tries to spot gaps in what the management is doing without actually getting involved in the management of the company. That's conceptually what the board does and is. But the board is made up of individuals, and not all of them can really do this in a very natural way. So lots of times, members of the board of directors get really down into the underwear of the company. And, they have relationships with members of the C-suite, and they have relationships with other members of senior management, and they want to know about this. They want to know about, how's recruitment going? They want to know, what are you doing about that compliance issue that we had over in Europe? And, they really get down into the nitty-gritty. And when that happens, they tend to drive a wedge or a conflict, a tension with the CEO, because it's the CEO's job to actually manage the company. And when the CEO perceives that the board is getting involved in matters that are too detailed, that are too much related to the management of the company, they start to have conflicts with the CEO. And I've seen many, many times when CEOs get to the point where they feel like they're having such conflicts with certain members of the board that they want to get those members of the board off. And this happens especially when the CEO is also the chairman of the board, right? So you have this situation where there's a power struggle about, what are the proper limits of the board dynamic. On the other hand, you have the board kind of doing its proper function, which is overseeing the company, and they have no means of doing that simply in their capacity as a board director, a member of the board. How are they going to oversee the company? They have no they're not receiving any memos. They don't get operations of the company. They get the reports that the CEO and the management generate for shareholders, but that isn't detailed enough. All of you can see the reports for shareholders. It doesn't give you enough detail to help you oversee the operations of the company. So the way that this works is that the members of the C-suite provide more detailed reporting to the board so that the board can see what's happening at a certain level of detail within the operation. So the role of the C-suite members is largely to educate the board. What's happening in my business? Let me tell you what's happening in my business. So I would give a report. Let me tell you what's happening in the legal division. Let me tell you what's happening in compliance. And the head of the insurance division in the United States would say, let me tell you what's happening in the insurance business in the United States. Let me tell you what's happening in the competition, right? What are the competitors doing? So that's what the C-suite is doing vis-a-vis the board. Meanwhile, all these politics are still operating, right? So the members of the C-suite who have ambitions to become CEO are trying to use this platform where they have legitimately a function of educating the board. They're trying to use that to curry favor and gain influence and gain a reputation among the board so that when the board ultimately, inevitably becomes fed up with the CEO or the CEO retires, they'll be sitting in the catbird seat to be able to become the next CEO. So, this is the dynamic of being in the C-suite and what's happening between the C-suite and the board. And then the final step, of course, is between the CEO and the members of the C-suite, right? So if the CEO perceives that members of the C-suite are trying to wheedle their way in with the board and kind of discredit the CEO, maybe make his position a little bit less secure. I say his because most CEOs are guys, but whether it's a man or a woman, they're still going to have that perception, that feeling of insecurity that members of the C-suite are trying to get into good favor with the board as a way of undermining the CEO. And so another part of this phenomenon is the CEO perceiving that there may be a threat to the CEO's own security and the CEO picking them off. So the CEO fires people because he or she thinks that this person is becoming a threat to their continued position as head of the company.
So what I'm hearing is that in next year's executive programs, we need a whole session on expert chess strategy, right? And that is going to be key to your career development next stage, right? Well, so you've mentioned kind of, we've talked about the politics of the relationships. Let's talk about the business, right? These C-suite leaders, you're operating a business unit in the company. And one of the main responsibilities in that is managing talent. That's come up a few times over the last of our time together yesterday. How are we supposed to manage talent, and what are the dynamics affecting that? Could you speak to how you see how would you describe the C-suite leaders' relationship with the team that reports to them and how they manage that business unit?
Sure. It's a really, really important aspect of this entire discussion. And in fact, it's unlikely that anyone would become a member of the C-suite without having some management competency, that the company, the person hiring one of you to become a member of the C-suite wouldn't have sort of kicked the tires on your ability to lead the team. Everybody in the C-suite has, in a fair-sized company, they at least have dozens of people reporting to them. When I was at MetLife, I had 1,100 people reporting to me. So it was a pretty big division within the company. And so they needed to figure out, was I going to be able to lead this rather significant team? When I was at the Hartford, the biggest team that I had led was 50 people. But the CEO decided that I was capable of doing this. When I actually went in and became the head of the legal affairs division at MetLife, and now I had 1,100 people reporting to me, I realized that this is a much bigger can of worms than I had ever really experienced before. And I started to understand kind of the talent management and the talent grooming aspect of being in the C-suite at a much deeper level. So in any really well-functioning corporation, you have a human resources department that's playing a key role in all of this. And the human resources department is thinking about, how are we going to make sure that we have leaders at all of the appropriate levels, at the top level, at the C-suite level, at the next level below the C-suite, and the next level below that. And the member of the C-suite who's in charge of that team, who's running that business, needs to be thinking about how are we going to populate each one of those levels of leadership. And that the HR department forces the member of the C-suite to actually perform this role. Honestly, not that many members of C-suites are doing that good a job at this particular function. Much of this function really gets done kind of in the, we'll call it, in the fabric of the organization, in the kind of ordinary cultural operation of the organization, where there are managers who are managing teams, and they're operating in the way that people have traditionally operated in this company. When I was at MetLife, I had people in the company, people in my organization who had been there 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, and they were managing teams within my organization, and they were just doing it the way that they had always done it, which was, basically they would find people that they regarded as competent, and they would put them into, positions of responsibility, and they would get product from them. And it's really kind of this habitual process that results in the face of corporate management that we see today. This is the sort of actual operation that leads to corporations being led by straight white men, because all the managers, or the vast majority of them, are straight white men who are giving other straight white men the opportunities to rise into positions of leadership, and it's just because it's their habit. And so this is kind of the non-thoughtful way that succession planning takes place habitually within an organization. And it's one of the paradigms that I decided that I was going to try to break when I was at MetLife. I decided that what we really needed to do was to think about, and of course it's because I have my perspective as a Latino, what we needed to do was think about who were the people, who were the high potential people in the organization who actually deserve to have a chance to try to become leaders. So, this goes into the discussion about sponsorship. And, Ann Chow yesterday said sponsorship is earned. I totally agree. Sponsorship has to be earned. I think I differ a little bit with Ann Chow in what I perceive to be kind of her assumption about the nature of sponsorship. That, the sponsor gets to decide who they're going to sponsor. I don't think that's right. And I think that, as long as we continue to allow that to be the paradigm, we're not going to change the face of diversity in corporate America. Because people are naturally, through their own processes of subconscious bias, are going to choose people like themselves. And unless you tell them that they have to break those habits, they're not going to break those habits. They're going to continue doing what they've been doing. So in order to really make this work, in order to make an initiative of diversity and inclusion work in corporate America, we need to tell corporate leadership that they need to be inclusive in the way that they think about sponsorship. And, there's a real benefit to the organization on many, many levels in doing this. We all talk about the benefits of diverse leadership and all that, and that's true. It really is beneficial to an organization to have diverse leadership. But you know what else is beneficial to an organization? It's to have mindful sponsorship taking place, so that you're not just picking the guy that the boss likes, you're actually also teaching that person what leadership is, right? Even if the person who succeeds, even if the person that gets chosen to be the next leader is a straight white guy, if you're teaching that person mindfully, consciously to be a leader, to be motivational, to like get the best out of every single person, then you've created a better leader. And so this is what I think we have to do. We need to teach corporate organizations that sponsorship can't just be letting the influential guys pick the people that they think are the next generation. We need to have processes that identify the high potential members of the organization who deserve leadership opportunities, no matter what their gender is, no matter what their sexual orientation is, no matter what their race is or their ethnicity. It should be the people who have the highest potential who get the opportunities to be leaders in the next generation. So that was a mouthful.
But it's meaningful, and I love that. I want everybody to remember mindful sponsorship. That's an important qualifier that I think we need to, not to put upon it, keep in mind, right? And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of Q&A around that, and we're about to enter into the Q&A, so please think about all of the things that you want to tap in and use this time to get more information on. I do want to pose, one question. We had a lot of things that we want to talk about sponsorship. Hopefully we'll get to some of that in the Q&A. This is a room full of leaders who are already in positions of influence, right? Some of you may be in position to do what Ricardo did and redesign sponsorship programs for your own companies. Others may be in the position where you are being sponsored, or you are actively sponsoring others and can model by different, your actions to create something different just by example. But as agents of change, you're looking at this group. What would you ask of them if you were going to say, how could they further this mission of advancement from their roles?
So, I kind of outlined in a very, very rudimentary way the way that I speak about sponsorship. I think that the key elements are, that there be, let's call it equality of access, the way that I just described, that you really kind of identify who the high potential people are and make sure that they have access. But even more importantly, there needs to be a true commitment on the part of senior leadership to have diversity and inclusion as part of the objective of the organization. And by that I mean we need to stop accepting lip service on this issue. Most CEOs of big corporations in the United States today will say, oh yeah, we're in favor of diversity and inclusion. Yeah, we believe in having more women in leadership. We believe in having more minorities in leadership, and they raise their hands and they wave and they smile, and then they go back and they might even tell their employees, we need to have more diversity in our leadership. But what do they do in terms of accountability? Do they require the members of their C-suite to put into place programs that are actually going to give opportunities to diverse leaders? Do they do what I did? I said, okay, everybody who's an officer in this organization, in legal affairs at MetLife and at Freddie Mac, every officer has to be a sponsor. All of you have to be sponsors, and all of you have to be effective sponsors, and we are going to decide collectively who you're going to sponsor. We're going to make the access fair based on our collective decision about who are the most high potential people. And if you do not succeed as a sponsor of diverse people, you're not going to get your bonus. There has to be accountability. If you want to succeed at something in a business, we know how to do it. Corporations do this all the time. If you want to increase sales 20% in your Western division, you incentivize people to do that. You give people a bonus if they achieve it, and you don't give them a bonus if they don't. If we want to have diverse leadership in our corporations, we give the leaders bonuses if they achieve it, and we don't give them bonuses if they don't. This is really very simple. It's a business objective, just like any other.
Thank you. So I appreciate the passion, you heard that, and frankly, the insights. So we're in our Q&A. We have some colleagues in the room with their microphones. We have probably room for about 2 to 3 questions, depending on the question. So who's first? I see we have a question over here.
Hi, Darlene Rodriguez-Hayes. I'm a senior corporate counsel.
Could you?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Darlene Rodriguez-Hayes, senior corporate counsel for Microsoft's mixed reality business. One of the things you mentioned as being important in order to obtain these leadership skills and be promoted into the C-suite is an ability to demonstrate organizational management excellence. And as you know, in law school, there are no classes, unlike business school, about organizational management, leadership, these types of things. And so what advice would you provide to people who are looking for those types of managerial opportunities, and how can one self-improve those skills, and maybe how did you find those opportunities within your own career?
Okay. Well, the first thing I would say is law school doesn't even teach you to be a lawyer, much less to be a manager. So you shouldn't be looking at law school. Really, when I hire people into an in-house position, I've had CEOs tell me, when I'm looking to hire a potential successor, for example, to make sure that I have my succession tree populated, they say, well, why don't you go ask that partner at this law firm that I once worked with? He's a really great lawyer. Why don't you get him? And I say, has he ever managed any people? So, well, he's got all these associates at the law firm. That's not managing people. In order to have a real management experience, you need to be accountable for sort of the career prospects of the people who report to you. If you're already in a corporation and you don't have a management role, then you need to find opportunities where you're going to be able to perform a management role for a team. So you should be looking to your boss and to your boss's peers for opportunities to lead projects. You want to be in charge of projects that are being staffed by multiple people, and you need to show your consciousness, your awareness of what they need in order to advance professionally. That's really what management's about. It's about making sure that you lead people, you motivate people, and you make them feel rewarded and engaged by working with you. You teach them, you give them your time. When it's time for everybody to go home, you pull aside somebody that you're trying to sponsor, mentor, train, and you go over things with them in detail. You spend your own time being a good manager for them, and at the same time as they're learning things, you're learning to manage, right? And you need to develop that reputation. You need to invest a lot of time in making sure that you are learning how to motivate people. You're learning how to listen to what their priorities are. And you're going to find a ton of people who say that they have ambitions, and what they really mean is they want to do what they're already doing today and they want to get promoted, right? It's not the way it works. Everybody who wants to grow and develop as a professional, as an executive or whatever, needs to put the time in. You need to be really transparent about that. You're not going to get to a higher position without putting effort and time and resources into that. And that's really the way that I've been able to sort of cull, when I talk about selecting high potential people. If I just send out the message, you're not going to get to be a high potential person unless you really invest of yourself, unless you're prepared to put in another 10 or 20% more than your peers into developing your career. That takes away at least 50% of the candidates. Nobody wants to invest 10 or 20% more than their peers in order to advance. Is that helpful? Okay.
Thank you. So no substitute for hard work, right? I have a question in the back.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those words. I lead the OLA PPRG at Bristol Myers Squibb, and something that we frequently have is people who have put the extra work, but unfortunately that work is not recognized. How do you create these allyship networks that make sure that when they are searching for talent, somebody will say, hey, this person, you should put it there?
So I understand your question to mean, how do you make sure that good work is getting recognized?
Yes.
Well, it's it's difficult when good work isn't recognized to figure out, how to recognize it. So from the perspective of people who were junior in an organization, it's like pushing a string up a hill, right? I mean, if you're the one who has done good work and you're trying to get recognized and you're not getting recognized, it's very difficult to get there. So, there's been a lot of talk in these sessions about finding mentors and sponsors, and that's really the way to get recognized. You need to have people who are more senior than you in an organization become aware of what you're doing, right? And you need to talk to them in detail about what you're doing. And you shouldn't do it in a self-aggrandizing way. What you should do is look for a relationship with someone where you are honestly and genuinely looking for guidance at how to do things better, right? How to do better at what you're doing, and talk about what you're doing with those people. If you can find a sponsor or a mentor who's a person of influence in your organization, that's you've hit the gold mine. That's really what you want. Somebody who's in a position of influence, and talk to them and try to express to them what you're doing and ask them, how can you do better? You really would like to be recognized for the work that you're doing, and you'd like their help in improving your professional skills. And that's, getting yourself exposed to someone who has the ability to communicate about you to others is very key. Ann Chow talked about this yesterday as well. What do people say about you, right, is very, very key. Things that are happening out of your line of sight are enormously important in your career advancement.
Right. Well, thank you. We are at time, and I know that there's more questions out there, so I'm going to encourage everyone to grab Ricardo at one of the coffee breaks and dive right in, because the stories are there as well as the expertise. Don't let this opportunity pass.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you, CJ.